There was a panel talking about just what a toxic fandom comic books have and how terrible it is. And Aaron, I think they found the wrong people for this panel.
Yeah, I think so too, because none of these people are really involved in any of the toxicity going on. It's all people like Ann Nocenti, Danny Fingeroth, people that are generally well liked. But we did get a pretty long manifesto from Mark Waid talking about how toxic things have become. Who, he hasn't contributed to that at all, has he?
Well, he talks about the brick throwers, and I thought to myself, he would be the last person in the world I would ever want to stand up for anybody talking about people throwing bricks. Mark Waid has positioned himself as a vocal critic of toxic fandom, denouncing online harassment and claiming that social media has worsened fan behavior. But while Waid points fingers at fans for enshittified discourse, his own conduct in the industry tells a different story. Waid has been accused of actively sabotaging fellow creators, most notably pressuring Antarctic Press to drop Richard Meyer's Jawbreakers, an action most viewed as a blatant abuse of industry clout. His history also includes allegations of workplace misconduct and hostile behavior, including a failed business partnership that ended with claims of bullying and manipulation. These aren't just some online spats. They reflect a pattern of divisive and aggressive behavior that mirrors the very toxicity he's condemning. For someone with a long track record of throwing bricks from within the house, Waid is in no position to lecture others about civility.
This is always the way, right? It's always the hypocrisy of, projection. Is he's going to sit there and he's going to project all the things that he does as poor behavior for everybody else. And he's the lone man. That's the only reason that he's toxic is because he's fighting back against these toxic trolls, even when he's like the one that starts it.
And the thing about Mark Waid sitting there wagging his finger at anybody is his toxic behavior actually translate before there was really even the internet or a lot of online internet discourse regarding comic books. So his bad behavior has been documented for decades at this point.
This is a man who, according to Mark Alessi, when Mark Alessi's business, CrossGen, was closing down because he had let Waid go, Waid sent him a bunch of black flowers with a letter that said, "What would your wife think of you now?" Mark Alessi's dead wife. That tells you everything you need to know about the pettiness and how small of a man Mark Waid is inside.
And I can't imagine Heidi McDonald is unaware of this stuff, but she still put out the article on The Beat acting like Mark Waid was the man fighting for creators' rights against a toxic fandom when he's probably the most toxic person in the history of comic books.
He has probably caused more toxic fandom with his behavior than anyone in the industry.
Why do you think they decided that he should be the one to stand up and let everybody know what the right thing to do is?
Well, because if it backfires, nobody really cares. Because most people in the industry, they put up with Mark Waid, but a lot of people don't like him. So if he goes out and he makes a fool of himself, it's not really any big deal. It doesn't really reflect poorly on the industry any more than it already does, because people just go, they're Mark Waid. There goes Mark Waid again, doing what Mark Waid does. So, he's a good useful idiot to send out for these things. And of course, Heidi's going to back him 100% because Heidi, backs all of this behavior. She's been part of the same whisper networks as Mark, trying to control who gets into the industry, who gets what work. This is all stuff that they've been doing. And, the real mask off moment for Mark Waid was when he went after Richard Meyer and Jawbreakers, and he did it publicly because he had become so filled with hubris that he thought he could get away with it publicly and there wouldn't be any kind of ramifications. And then he got sued for tortious interference up until the point that it seemed that Meyer was like, financially, this is not worth it. It's not worth all the time. It's not worth all the money. It's just not worth it to go after him. What am I really going to accomplish? I've already kind of, proven my point and backed off. And, I'm sure they both had to sign an agreement not to talk about each other. And that's why Waid kind of dances around it here. And I think why he's trotting out Ann Nocenti and Larry Hama, because those are two guys that he knows two writers that he knows Richard likes. And, so he can be like neener, which again, you're a man in your 60s. What are you doing? It's just one of those things. They've been doing that. If he was willing to do that in public at that point, how many things has he done behind the scenes? How many, little conniving maneuvers has he been making in these whisper networks and behind the scenes and talking to publishers and telling them don't hire this person and don't hire that person? And how many people has he gotten blacklisted? It's a lot. It has to be, because you don't just come out and do that boldly in public if you haven't gotten away with things for a long time.
Well, I don't think the fandom itself is toxic. I think that is a stupid idea. I do think there are toxic fans out there that do take things too far, that have treated some people online very, very poorly. And I do think that kind of conduct should be addressed and put out there in the open and had a conversation about it. But you can't take the conversation seriously as soon as you wrap Mark Waid around it.
Yeah, no, once he's the one who's doing the lecturing, it's pot, meat, kettle, and it doesn't make any sense and nobody cares.
Because I do know of instances of creators, maybe I don't think they're very good at their job, that have been harassed online to the point where people figured out where they lived and they physically had to move. I think that's wrong, and I think that should be addressed. And I don't think people should do that. I think that's bad behavior, and that is toxic behavior. I just don't think the fandom at large is doing it.
No, I don't think the fandom at large is. And, and it goes both ways. You have the people that defend the comic creators and the comic books, no matter how bad, all you have to do is say like, this book is bad. And then somebody will be, trying to destroy you. There's all kinds of crazy people online that'll come at you. It's just kind of par for the course if you're going to have any kind of public life at this point. So that doesn't make it right, and you even see it in the indie space. You see guys trying to harass other creators and, doing 3-hour live streams that are just 6-hour live streams that are just dedicated to tearing other people down. And then you see people going to people's houses or going to their businesses and trying to cause trouble. There is a toxic subculture, but when Mark Waid tries to paint so much of the customer base with that broad brush, I'm going to push back, because most of the people, look, I come on here and I say what I want. I don't pull any punches. I say whatever I want about, people in the industry. I don't care. I don't want to work in your petty little industry. I don't want to be part of your dirty little guilds or your whisper networks. You don't have anything to offer me. So I will come out here and I will give you my honest opinion. And for every time I do that, sometimes there's pushback in the comments, but everybody that comes up at a show or, bothers to come and see me is always very respectful. Even if they tell me they disagree with me, we have a nice conversation. So the majority of the customers out there, the majority of the fans out there that love comics and that are part of this are very well-adjusted individuals who, are able to have an adult discourse. Unfortunately, Mark Waid is not someone who is capable of an adult discourse, because it always, results in a pissy little baby tantrum. And then he tips the game board over and runs away.
And unfortunately, a lot of the examples they provide, we'll talk about Roy Thomas here, I don't really think was toxic fan base at all. I think that was pretty much justifiable feedback. Roy Thomas's behind-the-scenes manipulations to claim co-creator credit for Wolverine sparked genuine outrage among fans, and rightly so. While Thomas was Marvel's editor-in-chief at the time of Wolverine's inception, the character's creation is credited to Len Wein, John Romita Sr., and Herb Trimpe. Thomas's co-creator credit, which was only granted after Wein, Trimpe, and Romita Sr. had passed away, feels pretty opportunistic to many, especially if it contradicts long-established creator attributions. Despite Thomas's insistence that he seeks only recognition and not financial gain, his timing is very sketchy and rewrites history while those who could refute it are no longer alive. In this context, the fan backlash is not toxicity. It's an understandable defense of creator legacy and fairness. When creators blur the lines of credit for personal validation, they should expect scrutiny, not sympathy.
That's not toxic. That's just pushing back on some bullshit. Why did you wait till all three of these guys who might dispute the contribution that you say you made to this character? Why did you wait till they were dead to seek this recognition? And I don't believe that you're not getting financially compensated. I think that once you're listed as a co-creator, and he has to, and that big Deadpool Wolverine movie's coming up. That the MCU is about to do the X-Men. You're like, I better get in there. And try and get some money. That's exactly what it feels like. And so people have the right to look at that and say that it's suspect and to express that opinion. But you don't get to call them toxic just because they pushed back on what is probably very demonstrably a lie.
When you look at the way that they've done the attribution in the past, he's not entitled to it. They've never done it that way before. Mm-hmm. But also, if you think about the fact that Len Wein, Herb Trimpe, and John Romita Sr. have widows, it's not like they just create new money in the pie. They just slice up the pie and take away money from their widows to give it to Roy Thomas and, his wife. Mm-hmm. I think that's disgusting behavior.
I think so too. I don't see that that's toxic at all, to point that out.
No, but that's what they're trying to wrap up as toxic fandom.
Well, and of course, because it's all these guys like, your Mark Waids, your Roy Thomases, they're all the hero of their own story. When has Mark Waid ever taken accountability for anything? When has he ever said, I was the asshole here? Has it ever happened? I've never seen it happen.
Well, and certainly if Roy Thomas wants to go out there and do something that's completely against precedent, grab creator credit for a character that he wasn't really involved with. He was on the editorial staff. He was receiving benefits, all kinds of things that those creators never received. And their benefit was receiving creator credit. You don't get to go back and call people toxic for pointing out the fucking obvious.
No, not at all. But that's what he's going to try to do, because he's going to try to paint himself as the hero of the story.
And then the weirdest one, you kind of mentioned it earlier, Ann Nocenti's presence in this discussion about toxic fandom is puzzling to me. Not because she's unqualified, but because she has no significant history of fan conflict or controversy. Over decades in comics, she has earned a reputation as a respected creator with a calm, thoughtful demeanor, largely avoiding the public spats and online battles that have defined many of her peers' interactions with fans. Her comments about how fan engagement has changed since the pre-internet era are thoughtful but pretty generic, lacking personal anecdotes or direct experience with harassment. As such, her inclusion in the toxic fandom narrative feels more symbolic than actual substantive. Unlike creators who have been embroiled in legitimate conflicts, whether rightly or wrongly, Nocenti appears to be offering commentary from the sidelines. While her voice is always welcome, it's hard to argue that she represents a cautionary tale or being a victim of toxic fandom in the same way as others may claim to be.
You know, I've never seen anybody in the entire history of social media go at Ann Nocenti and say that, like, I've never seen anybody attack her. Everybody seems to respect her as a writer. Everybody loves her run on Daredevil. People really talk about how she got in the right way. You know, she came in, she was a secretary. She was like, I want to expand. I want to move on. And so she learned, and she became a very good writer in her own right. It wasn't handed to her. She worked for it. You know, it wasn't handed to her just because it was like, we need more women on the staff, so here, just write something. You know, she actually worked her way up the way that generally men had to get into the industry. Come on, write a small thing. Hey, that small thing did well, or people responded to it, or your editor liked it. Here's some more stuff. And then eventually she jumped on Daredevil, and her career was solid. You know, her run on Daredevil is very solid. It's very different than Frank Miller's, but it is interesting and really compelling in its own right. And it was, I hold it up there, with Frank Miller's stuff. It's very different, but it's very, very good.
Yeah, so I don't know why she was including this. Like, why aren't we including Wheezy while we're at it? Maybe we'll throw Walt Simonson on the panel, another person nobody dislikes or has ever said anything or has ever been embroiled in any type of controversy.
Yeah, Alex, we'll put Alex Saviuk up on the panel, a guy who drew Great Web of Spider-Man I've never heard anybody say a cross word about, and every time I've met him, he couldn't be more pleasant. Put him up there to talk about toxic fandom. This is just, this is like one of those things where it's like they're just trying to get people to dance to their tune. It's like, oh, you like these creators who are, never insulted you and things like that? Well, we're going to make them be on our side. That'll show you, chuds.
If toxic fandom is so prevalent, and if it's such an enormous problem that we're literally hurting creators, because that's what this article is suggesting, why can't you find people that can give you actual examples?
Yeah. Because it's not about truth. It's about crafting a narrative. This is the beginning. Like, look, comics is kind of falling apart. Diamond is accelerating it. There's just Marvel and DC will continue to exist until their parent companies decide that it isn't worth it and they pull the plug. Whether or not that'll happen, I don't know. I think it'll happen eventually, but who knows when. These things will stick around. But the industry is failing, in a lot of ways. It's not going to grow. It's the chances of it getting bigger are very slim. I think these people, a lot of people like, Mark Waid, like he's got to see the writing on the wall. How much longer does he really have left? Both as a writer and as, somebody who can get attention by going online. They're trying to rewrite the narrative while they can, so that they can say that when comics finally fails, it was the fault of toxic fans and not the fault of behavior of people like Mark Waid or Mark Brooks or, any of these people that go out and denigrate the fan base and insult the customers and then block them and cause ill will in the industry. You created the monster that you're railing against. You turned the fans against you with your behavior and with your elitist attitude that somehow, because you write comic books, that you're better than them. I've seen it. I've sat with artists that we'd invite people to dinner and this particular artist would be like, I don't know why you're inviting all these hangers on. And it was like, hangers on? Who the hell do you think you are? Someone comes up, they show me their portfolio, they've got a good body of work, they want to hang out and maybe get some advice. I will make that time available to them, because I remember what it was like to be the person that was trying to break in, that just hoped that somebody listened to you. So I will always try to be that person. And if you don't have any interest in that, if you look down on the people who give you money and who make it possible for you to do what you do, to live your dream of telling stories through the comic book medium, if you look down on them, get the hell out of here. You don't deserve their money. You deserve to be, jobless. You deserve to be out of the industry. Customer service is king, and these people are the customers.
And if you want to set up a panel at a Comic-Con and talk about toxic fandoms, and your headline act is a Dan Slott or Mark Waid, I'm sorry, but you lost moral high ground, and I'm going to mock you for it because you're not taking the fucking topic seriously. Now, if you want to talk about it seriously, and people who have been harassed and had their lives affected by certain individuals being assholes online, I say let's have that conversation. But if you want to throw up Roy Thomas after what he did to Len Wein and John Amita Sr. and Herb Trimpe's widows, I'm going to laugh in your fucking face because that was all well-deserved. Did people go too far? Probably. But what did he think was going to happen? Let's have an honest, real fucking discussion about this if it's such an enormous problem. And if it is such an enormous problem, it shouldn't be very difficult to find people that can add substantive comments and stories about this and how it's affected them. Ann Nocenti is not one of them. Mark Waid is not one of them. And certainly Roy Thomas is not one of them. It's a conversation worth having, but that was not the panel to do it with. I think they made a major mistake with that one. And putting that article out, they deserve to be mocked and ridiculed. If you appreciate what Aaron and I brought to the table today, this is just a small portion of the Geek Fix podcast, exclusive on Think Critical Patreon. If you'd like to check that out, as well as a bunch of other awesome podcasts, you need to go to the Patreon. There's a link in the video description. Hope to see you there very, very soon.